Kraven the Hunter has spent his entire life hunting the one thing he could never conquer: Spider-Man. But in Kraven's last hunt, Kraven doesn't just want to kill him, he wants to become him. So he shoots Spider-Man, buries him alive, steals his costume, and spends the next 2 weeks brutalizing criminals across New York City just to prove he could be a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker ever was. And somehow, he actually succeeds. He beats the villains, he defeats Vermin, he even convinces himself that he's finally accomplished everything his miserable life was leading toward. But there's one thing Kraven can never steal: Peter Parker's humanity. Because while Kraven sees monsters as things to hunt, Spider-Man sees people worth saving. And when Peter finally claws his way out of his own grave, he isn't just fighting to reclaim his identity. He's fighting to prove that being Spider-Man was never about how hard you can hit someone. It's about what you do when you're terrified, broken, and completely outmatched, and you choose to keep going anyway. This is Kraven's last hunt, and this might be the darkest Spider-Man story ever told. Real quick, guys, make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe, because if you made it past my hook, then I could tell you're feeling the vibes, and I'd love for you to become a part of the family. It's an offer you can't refuse. You deserve cinema.
Now lock in.
This story begins by following Kraven the Hunter as he wrestles wild animals fully nude for sport. By the second panel, you can already tell this is a Spider-Man story like no other. Kraven goes on to toss a panther a great distance with his bare hands and then literally punch the head clean off a gorilla with his bare fist. He is Kravenov. Kraven takes fantastical herbs and roots to create potions that grant him strength that rivals and maybe even surpasses Spider-Man's. Kraven has lived a long life, now corrupted by age. He's overcome every challenge except one. Kraven longs for his death, but first, he wants to end Spider-Man with one last hunt. Lightning splits the sky over a rain-soaked New York City as we cut over to Spider-Man. Peter has recently lost his friend Ned Leeds, who was killed not long after being brainwashed into becoming the Hobgoblin. Not the first friend of Peter Parker's to fall victim to goblin corruption. Not only that, but a man called Joe Face lies dead in a casket at Jimmy's corner, and for some reason, Peter can't shake this loss either. The guy was kind of a scumbag, but Spider-Man would also pump him for information on the criminal underworld, making him a valuable asset to fighting street-level crime. Spider-Man pops in to pay his respects to the deceased, which sends the other attendees running in fear. Peter goes home and lies down, only to suffer from graphic nightmares, or maybe even visions, of Kraven the Hunter feasting on spiders. Peter jolts awake, suits up, and swings out into the rain with a splitting headache that feels like jungle drums playing inside his brain. Spider-Man's senses are overloaded, and Kraven drops in on his location via helicopter, monologuing that he cannot rest until he's destroyed the one challenge that taunts him. Spider-Man crouches on a billboard as his spider sense starts to tingle. He's able to avoid one dart before carelessly allowing a second to hit, and poison him with a fast-acting drug, slowing him down. Spidey clocks Kraven and darts across rooftops to get in close quarters with him, only to be smacked across the head with a bow staff that sends him falling down onto a lower-level rooftop. Before Spider-Man can even pick himself up, Kraven's ensnared him in a hunter's net and jumps down to stand over him with his rifle. Peter has no idea what type of time Kraven is on, and it's only too late that he realizes this isn't the same Kraven he's used to. He tries to plead with the hunter, but without mercy, Kraven pulls the trigger and splits the sky with a shot that turns Peter's world black. Lightning strikes over Kraven's estate, and Spider-Man sits arms crossed in a wooden casket. He's lowered down into the earth, and as lightning continues to strike, Kraven starts to throw dirt on the casket. A rat scurries across the grave of Spider-Man. Kraven the Hunter has taken it upon himself to suit up as Spider-Man now in his place, and as he removes his mask, he laughs uncontrollably. We cut over to a lady trying to make it home quickly through the rain, but as she sprints across the street, the sight of a rat spooks her and she stumbles over. Before she could pick herself up, the sewer grate next to her opens, and a hand pulls her down into the darkness. Down below, A shadowy figure emerges and tells her his name is Vermin, a humanoid rat, an absolute lunatic who was once a man before Baron Zemo experimented on him. Cut over to our newlywed Mary Jane Watson, who is disappointed that her husband Peter Parker isn't here to help her pack up her things. See, he was supposed to come over and help her move all her stuff into his apartment now that they're starting a life together. She can't shake this feeling that he's dead. And not only that, but there's a rat running across her floor at the same moment. Mary Jane kind of loses control on the little creature, smashing it brutally and repeatedly with a boot. No time to dwell on that, however, because across town, Kraven is on patrol as Spider-Man and making his way back to his estate. He crawls into the mansion full of diffusers, releasing a pink smoke into the air. Kraven breathes it in and starts to imagine spiders everywhere, then barbarically laps up a liquid made of herbs out of a bowl. Kraven starts smashing things and faces his fears that have taken the shape of a giant spider. By the time our story pops back into the sewers, the poor lady from earlier is nothing but a rib cage now, having been consumed by vermin. He picks up a newspaper and sees Spider-Man. It makes him remember being beaten by him and Captain America in a previous story, and this shame leads him to want to venture back out into the surface and face his fears as well. Up above, Mary Jane is strolling the city in search of Peter despite the rain, when she happens upon two of the horniest dudes you'll ever see in a comic. They start catcalling her, gooning over how tight her pants are, and eventually start following her when she blows them off. MJ takes off in a sprint, and the two goons give chase. They grab her, throw her up against a wall, and this is when our three characters this issue follows converge on one location. MJ looks up to see Spider-Man swinging out of the shadows. He smashes one guy's face into the wall, disfiguring it, and then continues to beat the other over the head savagely, even after he goes down. Mary Jane begs him to stop, but Kraven has to prove himself the superior Spider-Man. He scales a wall and runs away, leaving MJ to think to herself that wasn't Peter at all. 20 yards away, Vermin exits the sewer grate, hungry again. So he sets out across New York City's rooftops in search of his next meal with no fear in his bones. Kraven the Hunter's Spider-Man watches through a window, assessing a drug operation. He smashes through the glass and pounces on guys before they can even draw their weapons and get off a shot. He smashes faces, kicks multiple people into unconsciousness, and ends it all by snapping someone's neck over his shoulder. The police show up and fire off shots at him, but he's able to escape out the same way he came in. Some of the police love Spider-Man's new methods, and others think there's cause for concern. He's been filling the hospital with criminals for weeks, and now he's killed a man. Lightning strikes the sky. He is Kraven. He has slain the spider and become him. In other events, Vermin has been picking innocent women off the streets and devouring them. The papers call him the cannibal killer. And on his way home tonight, he's struck by a patrol car. He smashes the window and yeets the driver out onto the wet ground, ordering his rats to consume him. The man's partner fires off a shot that strikes Vermin and orders him to spare her partner. Instead, Vermin takes a liking to her, pins her down, and licks her face before sparing her and leaving her. Over at Kraven's place in the city, he's stabbing a knife into a cage, forcing a rat to dodge the blade out of fear for its life. I say all this to highlight the constant foreshadowing the story gives us. Because tonight, Kraven has decided what will be his final test. He must take down the cannibal killer alone. Vermin is sleeping in his sewer home when he hears the footsteps splashing toward him. He tries to get up, but Spider-Man's hand is already around his throat, throwing him down into the water and challenging him. Kraven makes it a point to make sure Vermin remembers it took Spider-Man and Captain America to beat him last time. This time, Spider-Man will do it alone. Vermin is rageful. He attacks. Spider-Man wrestles him to the ground, only to be kicked away. Vermin is hacking and slashing at everything until he's able to grab a kick and stop it, biting down on Spider-Man's leg. Vermin takes a pipe to the head, and they both kneel down and let out an angry grunt. They clash again. This time Kraven is on top, pinning Vermin down into the water and clobbering him to sleep. He stands over the unconscious body triumphant because he is the superior Spider-Man. Able to do alone what the original Spider-Man could not, he carries the body up from the sewers and walks away. But before the chapter can end, a hand reaches out of Peter Parker's grave. Peter lays in a white catatonic state, so comfortable he could lay there forever. This scene reminds me of the one at the end of the last Harry Potter movie, only this one happened first. Peter only starts to freak out when he's met by Ned Leeds briefly before he melts away. Because if Peter is seeing Ned, then he must be dead as well. Peter continues to lay curled up in a ball until the thought of Mary Jane pops in his head. He transforms into a spider and starts to crawl his way out of a tunnel, right up until he's met by a handful of giant monsters that slay the spider. Peter crawls out from the belly of the spider and continues to make his way out of the tunnel, because you can murder a mask, but you haven't murdered the man or what he stands for. Peter's love for Mary Jane grounds him to his humanity and gives him the adrenaline boost needed to pull himself up out of the dirt. He rises up out of the ground, covered in mud, and the rain beats down on him. He stumbles his way through the grounds and up into the estate, finds a newspaper, and realizes Kraven has been out there ruining his name for 2 weeks. 2 whole weeks of his life he will never get back. Kraven senses he's out. Spider-Man throws the newspaper to the ground and walks through a curtain, trashing Kraven's trophy room and dismembering his taxidermy pets. 2 unlucky goons stumble upon him in his fit of rage, and he lifts them up by their collars. He asks them where Kraven is, but he can tell by their faces how scared they are, which snaps him out of it. He drops them and leaves crashing out of a window. Vermin has been imprisoned behind an electric fence by Kraven for the next step in his plan, and we shift over to the apartment of Mary Jane. Peter enters through her window, dripping wet, and takes off his mask. They embrace, and he falls asleep in her arms. When he wakes up, he puts on his suit, but Mary Jane begs him not to go out there again. She only just got him back. But we all know Peter can't leave this thing unresolved. As much as he'd like to, with great power comes great responsibility, and Kraven has murdered in his name. Peter takes MJ's hand for a brief second, and then swings out into the storm. Not long after, his spider sense gives him a warning, and he swings over to a window where he finds Kraven. He enters, crawls along the ceiling, and lowers himself down. There's no dialogue, but the expressions tell the story better than words ever could. Kraven can sense his presence, and everything is going according to plan. 2 things that are a given in this story. Vermin will continue to try escaping his cage, no matter how many times it zaps the shit out of him. In Kraven's inner monologue, repeatedly detailing how people thought his mother was insane, but he refuses to believe that. Spider-Man finally confronts Kraven, punches his face in until he coughs up blood, but Kraven puts his hands up and tells him there's no reason to fight. He challenges Spider-Man to see what's happened. Kraven has finally won. Kraven strips down into the nude out of his Spider-Man costume right in front of Peter. He puts on his normal hunter's outfit and explains that he, quote, killed Spider-Man and took his place. Spidey argues that he only drugged him and put him in a state simulating death, but that's the whole point. Kraven could have killed him permanently just as easy, but he wanted Spider-Man to live to see this moment. He wanted Spider-Man to know he was beaten and see that Kraven was able to steal his identity, replace him, and in all ways prove himself superior. Classic comic book trope, I know, to leave him alive, but in this case, it works. Kraven brings Spider-Man down to his dungeon, tosses a torch into Vermin's cage. Vermin panics and cowers in fear because Kraven has spent the last couple days burning and torturing him, all while wearing the Spider-Man suit. Spidey yeets the torch out of the cage and then delivers my favorite line of the story. "I've had it with you, Kraven. You think you could just stand there grinning like some brain-damaged gorilla? Well, you can't." Kraven hops up on his elephant and screams out in triumph, but Spidey only tells him to shut up and then lifts the whole elephant up, knocking Kraven to the ground. Kraven tries to caress Spider-Man's cheek, but Spidey smacks it away, cause he's a sick fuck. Kraven releases Vermin from the cage and tells him to have his revenge on Spider-Man. Vermin pounces, and though Spidey fights him off for a short while, Vermin eventually gets the upper hand, pinning Spider-Man to the ground. But before Spider-Man can be eaten alive, a knife comes flying through the air, stabbing Vermin. Kraven tells him to run, and Vermin seizes his freedom. A weight has been lifted off Kraven at this point, a sense of peace he's never felt before. He's proved to himself and his greatest enemy that he is the best in every way. For him, this is the moment his whole life has been building to, and there's no meaning to anything that follows. Kraven helps Spider-Man up the stairs and tells him to pursue Vermin as he knows he must. He swears he will never hunt again, and though skeptical, Spider-Man has a duty to fulfill. He jumps out into the night and enters the sewers. Kraven looks at his family portrait one last time before leaning over a casket he had prepared for himself. In the only moment of calm and happiness he has ever known, Kraven the Hunter pulls the trigger of his rifle and lays down in the casket for a long nap. Peter crawls through the sewers through sludge and slime, experiencing extreme claustrophobia and PTSD from his time in the coffin. He exits the pipe where it runs off and is met by a bunch of rats. He's scared, he's tired, and he wants to go home, but he battles on because he's the only one who can endure it. The police later arrive at Kraven's place, where they find his body and a full confession to everything he did in Spider-Man's name, making his final act a genuinely helpful thing for Peter Parker. In the sewers, Vermin emerges from the water behind Spider-Man, catching him off guard. Vermin repeatedly drags him under the water, putting Spider-Man in the most intense fight of his life, because at this point, the flashbacks are so intense, he has no idea if he's experiencing this now or if he's back in the coffin. But Peter also has a wife at home, which gives him the most purest form of strength he will ever have to fight for, unlike Peter Parker in 2026. Peter kicks off the wall and shoves Vermin down into the water, then disappears and uses stealth, anticipation, and fear to his advantage. He's flipped the script on Vermin in his own environment, and the fear starts to build in him until Spider-Man webs him up from the ceiling. He tries to appeal to any humanity Vermin has left, but when he mentions taking him to the surface, Vermin spazzes out and breaks the webbing. Spider-Man makes a run for it, exiting the sewer grate onto the New York City streets where the rain has finally let up. When Vermin runs out after him, he's met by daylight and cars swerving past him full speed. His senses are disoriented, and before he knows it, Spider-Man is swooping him up and carrying him across the road to a handful of police officers. Spider-Man webs up Vermin once more and leaves him with the police, swearing to him that he will have Reed Richards try to help. He swings off and returns home to the warm embrace of everyone's favorite redhead. And as the story comes to an end, Kraven is lowered into his final resting place. Or at least, it was at the time. Kraven's Last Hunt is a story about what happens when a villain becomes so obsessed with the hero that he doesn't just want to defeat him, he wants to become him. Kraven wants to prove that he could be Spider-Man better than Spider-Man himself, but I think the real takeaway is that beating criminals to a pulp isn't what makes Spider-Man. Sure, sometimes it's necessary. Spider-Man has to fight to defend innocent people, but the one thing Kraven can never replicate is the thing that actually makes Peter Parker a hero: his compassion. His ability to look past what someone has done and still believe there's a person underneath the monster. And that's where Vermin becomes so important. Kraven looks at Vermin and sees prey, something disgusting, something that needs to be hunted. Spider-Man looks at him and sees a human being who has become a monster. That doesn't mean Peter excuses what Vermin has done. What Vermin has done is horrific, but Peter refuses to believe that those actions mean the human being underneath is irredeemable. Maybe the man Vermin was before the experiments and mutation is still in there. Maybe that man deserves another chance. Spider-Man could lock him away and wait for the same problem to happen again when he gets out. Or he could try to save him. And that's the difference between Spider-Man and Kraven. Kraven can copy the costume, he can copy the violence, and he can hunt criminals. He can even convince himself that he's a better Spider-Man, but he can't copy the humanity. And I think that's what ultimately makes Kraven's entire accomplishment so tragic. He successfully becomes Spider-Man without ever understanding what makes Spider-Man a hero. I think the biggest theme running through this story is fear, and more importantly, how differently each character responds to it. There's a reason Kraven's Last Hunt was also published in collected form under the title Fearful Symmetry. Kraven is terrified throughout this story. He's terrified of death. He's terrified that his life hasn't meant anything. He's terrified that Spider-Man has become the defining figure of his existence. And he's terrified that after all these years he's spent hunting, he may still die having accomplished nothing worthwhile. So what does he do? He pushes through that fear by becoming the most brutal version of Spider-Man imaginable. He doesn't just defeat criminals, he terrorizes them, he hunts them. He becomes the predator that he believes Spider-Man should be, and Kraven sees that as his greatest accomplishment, as proof that his life finally has meaning. But then there's Vermin. Vermin's fear comes from somewhere completely different. He's been abused, experimented on, and treated like a freak for so long that his fear has consumed his humanity. His trauma has turned him into something dangerous. He becomes the monster everyone expects him to be. And then there's Peter. Spider-Man experiences arguably the most physically and psychologically traumatic ordeal of his life. He's buried alive, he wakes up trapped underground, he has to fight his way through the psychological damage Kraven has inflicted on him, and for a while, Peter is terrified. But Peter doesn't let that fear define him. He gets back up, not because he's fearless, because people need him. And that's where Mary Jane comes into this. Because Peter isn't the only person experiencing fear. MJ is terrified too. She doesn't know whether her husband is alive. She knows something is wrong, but she has no idea where Peter is or whether she's ever going to see him again. And while Peter is physically trapped underground, MJ is trapped in a completely different kind of nightmare. The possibility that the person she loves has simply vanished. That's what makes the story's use of fear so effective. Everyone is afraid of something. Kraven fears death and insignificance. Vermin fears the monster he's become. Peter fears failure, helplessness, and the possibility that he may never escape. And MJ fears losing Peter, but they all respond to that fear differently. Kraven tries to conquer it. Vermin is consumed by it. MJ has to endure it, and Peter chooses to keep going despite it. That's what makes him Spider-Man. He doesn't conquer fear by becoming stronger than it. He chooses to do the right thing while he's afraid. And that's why Kraven ultimately fails at becoming Spider-Man. He spends the entire story trying to prove that Spider-Man is a hunter. But he never understands that Spider-Man's greatest strength isn't his ability to destroy his enemies. It's his ability to believe they can be better. And I think that's why the Vermin storyline is more important than it initially appears. Kraven has already proven that he can imitate Spider-Man's physical abilities and methods. So Vermin becomes almost a test of what kind of Spider-Man Kraven actually is. Kraven sees a monster and hunts it. Peter sees a monster and asks, how do we save him? That's a huge distinction. Peter doesn't just want Vermin stopped, he wants the person underneath the mutation back. And that idea is something we've seen echoed decades later in Spider-Man No Way Home, where Peter's instinct is once again to cure the people who have become monsters instead of simply killing them. Obviously, No Way Home isn't proof of what DeMatteis intended in 1987, but it does show how deeply this idea fits into Spider-Man's character. Peter Parker doesn't have to believe someone is innocent to believe they're worth saving. That's the compassion Kraven can't understand. If someone can be cured, rehabilitated, or given another chance, then a life has been saved instead of another one being lost. And that's a much more difficult thing to do than simply killing the monster. This Spider-Man story isn't for the faint of heart. It explores horror, trauma, obsession, mortality, identity, and some of the most adult themes you'll ever experience in a Spider-Man comic. And somehow, it still feels unmistakably like Spider-Man. It's beautifully crafted, but I think one of the greatest strengths of J.M. DeMatteis' writing is that he truly understands the medium he's working in. There aren't thought bubbles constantly explaining exactly what Spider-Man is thinking or why he's firing his web shooters the way you might see in an older Stan Lee story. The writing trusts the artwork. The art does the heavy lifting, and that's one of the things I appreciate most about this book. I've built an entire channel around stories that have that kind of grit to them. I love comics, and I think the Silver Age is incredibly charming in its own way. But personally, I'm drawn toward the darker, more grounded and fucked up storytelling that became increasingly prominent during the Bronze Age and beyond. I want stories that aren't afraid to get ugly. I want stories that aren't afraid to make their characters suffer. And I wish there were more Spider-Man stories like this, because Kraven's Last Hunt isn't overloaded with characters. It doesn't need 12 different villains and 5 separate subplots to make the story feel important. The cast is focused. The pacing flows. Every character has a purpose. And by the time you reach the end, you realize just how easy this story was to read. You're not lost in a sea of exposition. You're just watching 3 damaged people collide, and Mary Jane is there watching the person she loves disappear into something she can't understand. That's all this story needs. And then you got one of the most memorable send-offs a villain has ever received. Kraven doesn't really lose. That's the fucked up part. He believes he accomplished exactly what he set out to do. He became Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, he proved to himself that he was superior. And when Peter finally returns, Kraven doesn't even need to fight him. Because in Kraven's mind, the hunt is already over. He's won. And then he dies. Not because Spider-Man defeated him, because he finally believes his life's purpose has been fulfilled. That's not really a victory. It's the final tragedy of Kraven's character. His entire identity was built around becoming something he could never truly understand. And then there's Peter. He survives. Vermin is given a chance at rehabilitation. MJ gets her husband back. For a moment, everything feels like it's going to be okay. But you know it isn't, because Peter has been through something he'll never completely forget. Everything is going to be okay, but nothing will ever be the same. And then there's the artwork. I genuinely don't think I could glaze this book enough. It's moody, it's atmospheric, the colors are mostly muted and dulled except when the psychedelic imagery demands your attention. The entire book feels wet. You can practically feel the rain falling. You can hear the thunder, you can see the lightning cutting through the sky. The artwork doesn't just show you the world of Kraven's Last Hunt, it makes you feel trapped inside it. The closest comparison I can make is Watchmen. Not because the two books look identical, but because both understand that comics are a visual medium. Sometimes an image can communicate something that paragraphs of dialogue never could. The visual storytelling in Kraven's Last Hunt is at the very top of my list. There are moments when the artwork gets strange enough to be confusing. Peter's encounter with the taxidermy animals is probably the biggest example, but for the most part, it's masterful. Sometimes the artist can communicate an entire scene with just a few panels. 3 boxes, one person's facial expression, and suddenly you understand everything they're feeling. That's not just good artwork, that's storytelling. Nuff said. And when it's all said and done, Kraven's Last Hunt is coming up on 40 years old. It was published in 1987, and people still talk about it as one of the greatest Spider-Man stories ever told. That's what timeless actually means. It doesn't matter that the story is almost 4 decades old. The horror still works, the psychology still works, the themes still work, the characters still work, and when you compare it to some of the stuff this generation gets fed, it's an absolute wash. And I think you can also see the DNA of this story in Dan Slott's Superior Spider-Man. I'm not going to pretend I can prove that Kraven's Last Hunt was directly responsible for Superior Spider-Man without Slott explicitly saying so, but the parallel is impossible to miss. Kraven's Last Hunt asks, what happens when someone who believes they understand Spider-Man gets the chance to become him? And Superior Spider-Man takes that basic concept and blows it up into an entirely different story. Otto Octavius gets Peter Parker's body and decides that he could be a better Spider-Man than Peter ever was. And what's fascinating is that Kraven and Otto make the same fundamental mistake. They think Spider-Man is defined by what he does. The fighting, the gadgets, strength, imitation, the victories, but neither of them initially understands what Spider-Man actually stands for. And that's why Kraven's Last Hunt feels so important. It's not simply a story about Spider-Man fighting Kraven. It's a story about what Spider-Man actually is. It's about fear. It's about obsession, trauma, mortality. It's about redemption. It's about the difference between a monster and the person trapped inside the monster. And most importantly, it's about the difference between being Spider-Man and actually understanding Spider-Man. Kraven could become Spider-Man. He could wear the costume, he could imitate the violence, he could beat the villains, he could convince himself that he was better, but he could never become Peter Parker, because Peter Parker's greatest power was never the spider bite. It was never the strength, it was never the web shooters, it wasn't even the mask. It was the decision to keep caring, even when he's afraid, even when he's hurt, even when someone has done something horrible. Peter still looks at the person underneath the monster and thinks, maybe there's still something worth saving. And Kraven could never understand that. Which is why in the end, Kraven actually accomplished exactly what he wanted. He became Spider-Man and still couldn't understand what Spider-Man was. If you stuck around to the end of this video, I want you to know that even though I can't offer you any type of reward right now, you are the reason why there will be another video in the future. I appreciate you greatly. In the meantime, check out one of my other videos or tap into my shorts for modern comic coverage, 'cause you deserve cinema.